I remember the exact moment the thought first crossed my mind, and the part that still unsettles me is how normal everything looked around it. It was a Thursday evening in late September. Nothing dramatic. No storm outside, no loud argument, no huge turning point in my life that would justify the way things unfolded afterward. Just an ordinary night. I was sitting at the bar of a place called Miller's on the edge of downtown Denver, the kind of casual sports bar that smells faintly like fried food and beer no matter how often they clean the floors. Big TVs on every wall, Broncos highlights looping endlessly, people half paying attention while talking over each other. I had stopped there after work because I didn't feel like going home yet. My wife Emily and I had been married 6 years at that point. We had a decent life. Not perfect, but stable. We owned a small townhouse in a quiet neighborhood about 15 minutes outside the city. We both worked regular jobs, had a dog that shed everywhere, and spent most weekends doing the same things couples our age tend to do. Groceries, Netflix, dinners with friends, maybe a hike if the weather cooperated. From the outside, it probably looked like we were doing everything right. But something inside our marriage had gone quiet over the past year. It's hard to explain exactly how that happens. Nobody wakes up one day and decides the spark is gone. It fades in small ways you barely notice at first. Fewer long conversations, fewer spontaneous moments. The routine gets tighter, like the walls of your life slowly moving closer together. Emily wasn't a bad wife, not even close. She was thoughtful, responsible, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and always brought the right dish to family gatherings. She cared about our life together. But somewhere along the way, we stopped really seeing each other. Or maybe I stopped feeling seen. That night at the bar, I was halfway through my second beer, watching a game I didn't actually care about, when a voice next to me said, "You look like a guy who's either thinking too much or trying not to think at all." I turned slightly and saw her sitting 2 stools down. Her name was Laura, though I didn't know that yet. She looked maybe mid-30s, a little younger than me. Long brown hair pulled back loosely, a leather jacket draped over the back of her stool. There was a half-empty glass of red wine in front of her. She had the kind of relaxed confidence that made it seem like she'd been in that seat for years, even though I was pretty sure she had just walked in. "I'm watching football," I said. She glanced up at the TV. "Are you, though?" I laughed despite myself. Fair point. She slid her glass slightly across the bar and leaned her elbows on the counter. "I'm Laura." "Jake." We shook hands briefly. Her grip was warm, casual. "So Jake," she said, "what's the verdict? Thinking too much or avoiding thinking?" I took another sip of my beer. "Probably both." She nodded like that answer made perfect sense. "I come here when I'm doing the same thing," she said. That was how it started. Just 2 strangers sitting at a bar talking about nothing in particular. Work frustrations, Denver traffic, the way rent prices had gotten ridiculous, even in neighborhoods that used to be affordable. The conversation felt easy in a way that surprised me. There was no awkwardness, no forced small talk. Laura had this way of listening that made you want to keep talking. At some point, the bartender came by and asked if we wanted another round. Laura lifted her glass slightly. "One more," she said. I should have paid attention to the little voice in my head at that moment, the one reminding me that I had a wife at home who thought I was just grabbing a quick drink after work. But the voice didn't sound very loud. The truth is, I wasn't thinking about Emily much at all right then. I was thinking about how long it had been since I had a conversation that felt this alive. Laura asked about my job. I told her I worked in commercial property management, which always sounded more interesting than it actually was. "What about you?" I asked. "I'm a physical therapist," she said. "Mostly sports injuries." "Busy?" "Always." She took a sip of wine and studied me for a moment. "You seem like a responsible guy." I laughed. "That sounds like an insult." "It's not," she said. "Just an observation." "Based on what?" "Your posture. The way you keep checking your phone even though no one's texting you. The fact that you ordered a light beer instead of something stronger." I shook my head. "You've got me all figured out." "Not all figured out," she said. "Just enough." There was a brief pause. Then she asked the question that shifted everything slightly off-center. "So are you meeting someone here tonight?" It was an innocent question. People ask it in bars all the time. But the way she looked at me when she said it made it feel heavier. I hesitated just long enough for her to notice. "My wife's at home," I said finally. She didn't react the way I expected. No awkward apology, no sudden distance. She just nodded once. "Got it." And then she took another sip of her wine like the information had simply been filed away somewhere in her mind. The conversation kept going. We talked about travel, movies, childhood stories about stupid things we did as teenagers. An hour passed before I even realized it. At some point, Laura laughed at something I said and lightly touched my arm. It was a small gesture, casual, but it sent a strange jolt through me. I can't explain why. Maybe because physical contact outside my marriage had become so rare that even something innocent felt amplified.
maybe because it had been a long time since someone new had looked at me with genuine interest. Eventually, I glanced at my phone. 9:17 p.m. Emily had texted earlier asking if I was coming home soon. I hadn't answered. "You just remembered you have somewhere to be," Laura said. Something like that. She smiled. I should probably head out too. We both stood at the same time. Outside the bar, the September air felt cool and sharp compared to the warmth inside. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk. For a second, we just stood there. "Well," I said, "it was nice meeting you." "You too, Jake." There was a pause where either of us could have simply walked away. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her phone. "Let me ask you something," she said. "Okay. If you didn't have a wife waiting at home," my chest tightened slightly, "would you want to see me again?" It was such a direct question that my brain froze for a second, because the honest answer came immediately. Yes. That's what startled me. Not the attraction itself, but how quickly the answer appeared in my mind. Laura watched my expression carefully. "You don't have to say it," she said quietly. "Your face already did." I exhaled slowly. "This is a bad idea." "Probably," she agreed. The strange thing was she didn't sound disappointed. She sounded calm, like someone acknowledging a fact of life. Then she stepped a little closer. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Sure." "The way you looked at me tonight," she paused briefly. "That's what I always wanted someone to look at me like." How words landed deeper than they should have, because part of me knew exactly what she meant.
And part of me realized something uncomfortable in that moment. I had been looking at her that way, without even realizing it. Laura slipped her phone back into her pocket. "Well," she said softly, "have a good night, Jake." Then she turned and started walking down the sidewalk. I watched her disappear toward the parking lot. I should have gotten into my car and driven straight home. Instead, I stood there under the streetlight for another full minute, staring in the direction she had gone. And the thought that kept echoing in my head wasn't about my wife. It was about what Laura had said, "The way you looked at me tonight." Because the truth was, I hadn't looked at anyone like that in years, not even Emily. And somewhere deep down, a dangerous realization was forming. Maybe that moment at the bar wasn't something I should regret. Maybe it was something I had been wanting for a long time, even if I hadn't admitted it to myself yet. I told myself I wasn't going back to that bar. That was the plan when I drove home that night. The roads were mostly empty, the kind of quiet weeknight traffic where you can actually hear your own thoughts over the hum of the engine. My phone sat in the cup holder with Emily's earlier message still on the screen. "Are you coming home soon?" I finally texted back while sitting at a red light. "Yeah, just leaving now." She replied almost instantly. "Okay, I'm watching that crime show you hate." That made me smile a little, the way small, familiar things sometimes do. It felt normal, safe, like the life I had built was still exactly where I left it. When I walked into the townhouse 15 minutes later, Emily was on the couch with a blanket around her legs and the dog curled beside her. The living room smelled faintly like the lavender candle she liked to light in the evenings. "You're late," she said casually, without looking away from the TV. "Work ran long," I said, which technically wasn't a lie. She muted the television and looked at me. "You okay?" "Yeah. You seem, I don't know, distracted." I shrugged and leaned down to scratch the dog behind the ears. "Just tired." Emily studied my face for another second, then nodded like she decided not to dig deeper. "Long day?" "Something like that." She unmuted the show and leaned back against the couch cushions. I went into the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water, trying to act like my mind wasn't replaying the entire conversation with Laura on a loop. "The way you looked at me tonight." It kept echoing in the back of my head. Not in a guilty way exactly, more like a question. That night in bed, Emily fell asleep quickly, her breathing slow and steady beside me. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning above us. There's a strange moment after something new enters your life, even if it's small, even if it's just a conversation with a stranger. Your brain keeps returning to it like a tongue pressing against a loose tooth. You tell yourself it doesn't mean anything, but you keep checking anyway. The next morning, life went right back to routine. Emily left for work around 8. I headed to the office downtown, where I spent most of the day dealing with tenants complaining about parking spaces and maintenance issues. Normal stuff. But every once in a while, my mind drifted back to Miller's. Back to the bar stool 2 seats away. Back to Laura's calm, steady voice. "If you didn't have a wife waiting at home, would you want to see me again?" The answer was still there, clear as ever. Yes. I hated how easy it was. Around 5 o'clock, my coworker Mark leaned into my office doorway. "Couple of us are grabbing drinks," he said. "You in?" Normally, I would have said yes automatically. It was a regular thing after work. But that day, something about the idea made me hesitate. "Where?" I asked. He shrugged. "Not sure. Somewhere near Market Street, probably."
Miller's was on Market Street. My brain noticed that immediately. I've got some stuff to finish, I said. Mark rolled his eyes. You always have stuff to finish. Tomorrow. He laughed and walked away. By 6, I had wrapped up everything on my desk. The office had mostly emptied out, the usual quiet settling over the building. I grabbed my keys and headed to the parking garage. For a while, I just sat in the driver's seat with the engine running. I told myself I was deciding what to eat for dinner, but the truth was simpler than that. I was deciding whether to drive home or drive 3 blocks to Miller's. It shouldn't have been a difficult choice. One option led back to the life I had promised to build with my wife. The other option led back to a woman I had known for barely 2 hours. And somehow the second option kept pulling harder. I lasted about 30 seconds before putting the car in reverse. Miller's looked exactly the same as the night before. Same glow of televisions through the windows. Same cluster of cars in the parking lot. I told myself there was almost no chance Laura would even be there. It was a random bar in a city of 3 million people. The odds were ridiculous. But the second I walked through the door, I saw her. She was sitting in almost the exact same spot, third stool from the end of the bar. She looked up as I stepped inside, and for a split second, the surprise on her face was completely genuine. Well, she said when I approached, that's unexpected. I tried to sound casual. Guess I like the beer here. She smiled slightly. Sure you do. The bartender came over. Another light beer? Yeah. Laura swirled the wine in her glass and studied me the same way she had the night before. You came back, she said. Looks like it. I figured you'd go home and decide that talking to a random woman at a bar was a terrible idea. That thought definitely crossed my mind. And? I took a sip of the beer the bartender had just placed in front of me. I guess I wanted to see if you'd be here. Laura leaned back slightly on her stool. That's dangerously honest. You asked. She nodded slowly. Fair enough. The conversation started again almost exactly where we left off the night before. It was strange how natural it felt, like we were picking up the second half of a discussion that had only paused for a few hours instead of an entire day. We talked about stupid workplace stories, the worst road trips we'd ever taken, the weird habits people develop when they live alone. About halfway through my second beer, Laura tilted her head slightly. So I'm curious about something, she said. Okay. You told me last night you have a wife. Yeah. And yet here you are again. Her tone wasn't accusing, just observant. I didn't come here planning to do anything wrong, I said. That's not what I asked. She took another sip of wine. I'm trying to figure out what you wanted when you walked through that door. The question hung in the air. I considered lying, saying I just liked the bar, saying I needed a drink after work. But something about the way she looked at me made that feel pointless. I wanted to see you again, I admitted. Laura didn't smile right away. She watched me carefully for a few seconds. Why? That was a harder question. Because talking to you felt, I searched for the word, different. Different how? Like I remembered what it's like to feel interesting to someone. Her expression softened slightly. That's a pretty honest answer. I'm not trying to impress you. I know.
The bar was louder than the night before. A group near the far end was cheering at one of the TVs. But sitting there, next to Laura, it felt like the rest of the room had faded into the background. She set her glass down. I should tell you something, she said. What? When you walked in tonight. She paused briefly. I was weirdly happy to see you. That simple admission did something to my chest I wasn't prepared for. You were? She nodded, which is annoying. Why? Because I told myself last night that was the end of it. And? She gestured between us. Clearly that plan didn't work. We both laughed quietly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Laura said something that shifted the ground beneath the conversation. Jake, do you love your wife? The question caught me off guard. Yes, I said automatically, but even as the word left my mouth, I realized something uncomfortable. Laura noticed too. You hesitated. Not really. A little. I rubbed the back of my neck. It's complicated. Most things are. She leaned slightly closer. Let me ask a better question. Okay. Are you happy? That one hit harder, because the honest answer wasn't something I had allowed myself to examine too closely before. I don't know, I said. Laura nodded slowly, like she had expected that response. That's usually the real problem, she said quietly. Then she looked directly into my eyes. You know what's strange? What? When you walked in yesterday, I had this weird thought. What thought? She smiled faintly. That you looked exactly like the kind of man I always hoped I'd meet someday. My heart thudded once against my ribs. And now? I asked. She held my gaze for a long moment. Now I'm realizing you already belong to someone else. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then she added softly, which makes this a very dangerous conversation. The thing about dangerous situations is that most of them don't feel dangerous at first. They feel exciting. That's the part people don't say out loud. Sitting at that bar next to Laura, with the noise of the TVs and conversations around us, it didn't feel like my life was drifting towards something destructive. It felt like something had suddenly come alive again. That was the lie my brain kept feeding me. After Laura said it was a dangerous conversation, neither of us moved for a few seconds. The music playing through the speakers shifted to some old rock song I vaguely recognized, and the group at the far end of the bar burst into laughter about something unrelated to us. Normal life continued all around us. Laura traced the rim of her wine glass with one finger. "You should probably go home," she said quietly. I let out a small laugh. That's the responsible answer. It's the correct answer. But not the one you want? She looked at me, and for the first time since I met her, there was something uncertain in her expression. "No," she admitted. The honesty in that moment landed hard, because it matched exactly what I was feeling. "I didn't plan to come back here tonight," I said. "I believe you." But the thought kept bothering me all day. What thought? That I might never see you again. Laura leaned back slightly in her chair, studying my face the way she had the night before. "You barely know me." "I know. And yet you came looking for me." "Apparently." She let out a quiet breath through her nose, almost like she was amused with herself. "You realize what we're doing right now? Talking?" Dancing around a very obvious line. The bartender passed by again, asking if we wanted another round. Laura lifted her glass. "One more," she said. I hesitated for a split second, then I nodded. "Yeah." The bartender poured another glass of wine and set another beer in front of me. Laura watched the foam settle in my glass. "You're not the type," she said. "The type for what?" "This." I took a sip of the beer. "And what exactly is this?" She gestured lightly between us. "A married man sitting in a bar 2 nights in a row with a woman he just met, pretending he doesn't know where it's going." Her words were blunt, but there wasn't any judgment behind them, just observation. "You seem pretty sure about where it's going," I said. Laura shrugged slightly. "I've been alive long enough to recognize certain patterns. And this is one of them?" "Yes." She held my gaze. "And the truth is, Jake, if we keep sitting here like this, something will eventually happen." The way she said it wasn't seductive or dramatic. It was calm, matter of fact, like someone explaining gravity. I felt a tightness in my chest. "Does that bother you?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she picked up her wine glass and took a slow sip. Then she set it back down. "Yes," she said, "but not for the reason you think." "What reason is that?" "Because I actually like you." That caught me off guard. "You've known me for 2 hours. Closer to 4 now. You know what I mean." She nodded. "I do." Another pause settled between us. Then she said something that made the entire situation feel suddenly heavier. "I don't want to be someone's secret mistake." The words hit harder than anything else she'd said so far. "I didn't come here to make you a mistake," I said. Laura raised an eyebrow slightly. "Then why did you come here?" That question again. And once again, the honest answer was sitting right there in my chest, uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. "Because I wanted to see you," I said. "Even though you're married?" "Yes." She studied my face for a long moment. "Does your wife know you're here?" "No." "Would she be okay with it?" "Probably not." Laura nodded slowly. "Then you already know this crosses a line." "I know." "But you still walked through the door." I looked down at my beer for a second before answering. "Yeah." The bar had gotten louder as the night went on. Someone near the back started a loud debate about the game playing on the TV. But sitting there, it felt like the conversation between Laura and me had narrowed into something much more private. "You know what scares me about this?" she said softly. "What?" "That it doesn't feel casual." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, most situations like this are obvious. 2 people flirting, maybe a few drinks too many, a dumb decision at the end of the night." She leaned a little closer. "This doesn't feel like that." "How does it feel?" "Like something we both wanted before we even walked in the door." The accuracy of that statement made my stomach tighten, because it was true. When I drove to Miller's that evening, I already knew why I was going. Laura must have seen the realization on my face. "See," she said quietly, "that's the dangerous part." I ran a hand through my hair. "So what are we supposed to do?" "Leave." "That simple?" "Yes." "But we're not leaving." "No," she said. "We're not." The bartender came by again, dropping off the check for Laura's wine. She glanced at it and then reached for her purse. I instinctively slid my card across the bar. "I've got it." She looked at the card and then back at me. "You really are a responsible guy. That's what you said yesterday. And yet here you are." I smiled slightly. "Apparently I'm more complicated than you thought."
Laura laughed softly. Apparently, we walked outside together again a few minutes later.
The night air had cooled even more than the day before. The street was quieter now, the bar crowd thinning out as it got later. For a moment, we stood under the same streetlight as the previous night. The situation felt strangely familiar. Laura shoved her hands into the pockets of her jacket. "You should go home," she said again. "You keep saying that, because it's still true. But you're not leaving yet." "No," she admitted. I took a slow breath. "Laura, yeah? What if I told you something?" "That depends on what it is." "What if I said that tonight, sitting there with you, felt like the first time in a long time I wasn't just going through the motions of my life?" She watched me carefully. "That's a big thing to say about someone you just met." "I know, but you mean it." "Yes." Laura looked down at the pavement for a moment, then back up at me. "You're going to make this very hard to walk away from." "That wasn't my intention." "I know." Another quiet pause settled between us. Then she asked the question that finally stripped away the last layer of pretense. "If you weren't married," she said slowly, "what would you do right now?" The answer came instantly. "I'd ask you to have dinner with me tomorrow." Her lips parted slightly. "And after dinner, I'd want to see you again." "And after that?" I stepped a little closer without really thinking about it. "I guess we'd find out where it goes." Laura's eyes searched my face like she was trying to measure how serious I was. "You realize that's exactly the kind of thing someone says before everything gets messy." "I'm aware." She let out a small breath. "God, what? You're exactly the kind of man I always hoped I'd meet." My chest tightened again. "But you're already someone else's husband," she added quietly. Neither of us moved for a moment. Then Laura said something so softly I almost didn't hear it. "And the worst part is," "What?" "I don't think either of us wants this to end tonight." For a few seconds after Laura said that, neither of us moved. The street was quiet except for a car passing at the end of the block and the muffled sound of music drifting out of the bar behind us. The same streetlight from the night before cast that pale yellow glow over the sidewalk, and somehow the whole scene felt suspended in time. I knew exactly what she meant. Neither of us wanted the night to end, and the problem was, we both understood what that meant. Laura shifted her weight slightly and looked down the street where her car was parked. "I should go," she said quietly. "You said that already." I meant it more this time. I nodded, even though I didn't move either. My brain kept replaying the conversation inside the bar, the questions she had asked, the ones I hadn't been able to dodge. "Are you happy? If you weren't married, what would you do right now?" The answers were still sitting in my chest like they were waiting for something. Laura turned back toward me. "You're thinking too hard again," she said. "That obvious?" "Yes." She studied my face for a moment. "You're trying to decide whether this is the moment everything goes wrong." "That's pretty much it." "And?" "I don't know." She nodded slowly. "That's the honest answer." We stood there for another quiet moment. Then Laura said something that shifted the entire direction of the night. "Come walk with me to my car." It wasn't a flirtatious request. It sounded simple, casual, but we both knew it wasn't really casual. I hesitated for half a second before nodding. "Okay." We started down the sidewalk together. The night air had that crisp early fall feeling Denver gets when summer finally lets go. The kind of air that makes you feel more awake than you expect it to be. Laura's car was parked halfway down the block under another streetlight. When we reached it, she stopped and turned toward me. "Well?" she said softly. "Well?" Neither of us reached for the car door. Instead, we just stood there again, facing each other. "I meant what I said earlier," she said. "About what?" "Not wanting to be someone's secret mistake." "You wouldn't be." Her eyebrow lifted slightly. "Jake, I mean it. You're married." "I know. That's kind of the definition of the situation." I rubbed the back of my neck. "I didn't plan for this to happen. No one ever does." She leaned lightly against the side of her car. "You know what the strange part is?" she said. "What?" "When you walked into that bar yesterday, something about you felt familiar." "Familiar?" "Like I'd been waiting for someone exactly like you without realizing it." My chest tightened slightly. "That sounds dangerous." "It is." She looked up at me again. "But it's also honest." A car drove slowly past us on the street, headlights sweeping across the pavement before disappearing around the corner. The quiet returned. "I should go home," I said finally. Laura nodded. "Probably." But the word hung there between us, unfinished. I didn't move. Neither did she. "You're still here."
So are you. She smiled faintly at that. Fair point. Another long pause stretched between us. Then Laura asked something that felt heavier than all the other questions she had asked that night. When was the last time you felt excited about something in your life? The question caught me off guard. I don't know. Try. I thought about it for a moment. Work didn't excite me. The routines of my marriage had settled into something predictable. Even the hobbies I used to enjoy had started to feel like obligations. I honestly can't remember, I said. Laura nodded like that answer made sense to her. That's what I thought. And what about you? I asked. She gave a small shrug. Probably right now. My heart thumped once against my ribs. Standing in a parking lot? Standing here with someone who clearly shouldn't be standing here with me. The bluntness of it made me laugh quietly. You have a way of making things sound dramatic. I'm just describing reality. Then she looked at me again, her expression suddenly serious. I want to ask you one last thing before we leave. Okay, if you walk away right now, and we never see each other again. She paused. Are you going to think about this moment? The answer came before I even finished processing the question. Yes. How often? Probably more than I should. She nodded slowly. That's what I thought. I took a breath. Let me ask you something. Go ahead. If I never walked into that bar again? Yes? Would you think about it too? Laura didn't hesitate. Yes. The honesty of that moment felt heavier than anything else that had happened between us, because there was no pretending left. We both understood the situation perfectly. You know what's strange? She said quietly. What? For years, I've had this idea in my head about the kind of man I wanted to meet. She looked straight into my eyes. Someone thoughtful, someone calm, someone who actually listens when you talk. My stomach tightened. And then you walked into a bar on a random Thursday night, she continued. Apparently. And now I'm standing here wishing the timing wasn't so completely wrong. The words sat between us for a few seconds. Then she said something softer. But life doesn't care about timing. I felt my pulse quicken. No, it doesn't. Laura pushed herself off the side of her car.
She stepped a little closer, close enough that I could see the faint freckles across the bridge of her nose in the streetlight. You should go home, she said again. But this time her voice sounded different, quieter. Yeah, I said. Neither of us moved. You're still not leaving, she said. Neither are you. She laughed softly. We're terrible at following our own advice. Apparently. For a second, we just stood there, looking at each other. Then Laura shook her head slightly. You know what the worst part of this is? What? That if things were different, how different? If you had walked into that bar single, she exhaled slowly, I probably would have asked you out myself. My chest tightened again. Yeah? Yes. And what would I have said? She smiled faintly. I think we both know the answer to that. The silence that followed felt heavy. Because she was right. I did know the answer. I stepped a little closer without really thinking about it, close enough that the space between us was almost gone. Laura didn't step back. For a second, her eyes searched my face like she was giving me one last chance to stop. You know what this is, she said quietly. Yes. And if it happens, you can't pretend it didn't. I know. Another pause. Then she whispered something that made my heart pound even harder. Part of me has wanted this kind of moment for years. What kind of moment? She held my gaze. The kind where you meet someone and you just know. My voice came out lower than I expected. Know what? That this is what you always wanted. The words hung between us. And standing there under that streetlight, closer to her than I had been all night, I realized something that made everything feel dangerously simple. I wanted this too. Even knowing exactly how complicated it would make everything afterward. Even knowing someone else was waiting for me at home. And when Laura leaned slightly closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath in the cool night air, the thought that passed through my mind wasn't about consequences. It was something much simpler. This is what I always wanted. And somehow, against every bit of common sense I had left, I knew I was about to let it happen.